Hello, how's everyone doing today? Hopefully everybody's been good. And yeah, I mean, basically it's the greeting, I guess. But so this video, I'm just gonna make about uh, just the serious and the severity of this situation, just because many individuals are still very ignorant about it. The damage that actually comes from your unwillingness to fight, and obviously the repercussions from it as well. And as well as the real damage of everybody not being on the same page and everybody being and doing the same works, and obviously having that same common ground that we all have to be engaged in spiritual warfare. I mean, that's basically going to be that part of the video, and then from wherever else, from there I'll just go on to something else that I forgot about in the past video. But so yeah, basically it's just the fact of the matter. I mean, you could be naive about it, or whatever the case may actually be. So in the kingdom of darkness, right, there's individuals that are obviously have brought their kids into the spirit realms, where they molest them, they do this, they rape them, they have orgies with them, they have orgies with grown adults and grown men and women with kids, and everybody's just doing everything else to please their own, the lusts and whatever else they obviously have. So close those doors. And so basically, that's actually happening in the spirit realm. But also, and this is the main thing as well. The little kids are also trying to make the innocent kids have to suffer and become foster children, as well as they're over here just trying to make each one of their own members of the kingdom of darkness become foster children as well. So obviously they're doing that type of work. All of them are working together with the same goal in mind, especially the kids that are already in the know that they're going to be foster kids. They don't really have anything holding them back or anything like that. So for sure they're taking advantage of it, and they're taking advantage of individuals' unwillingness to fight, and especially their naivety to the situations, and the fact and what is actually happening. And so obviously you begin to see the real damage that could actually cause. And excuse me, I have a gum. But so yeah, so I mentioned how they molest them and they do other things like that. Basically, anything and everything vile that you could think of, you could conceive of. Obviously, that's what essentially they're actually doing in the kingdom of darkness. Nobody's essentially sending angels or legions to actually be able to intercede and intercept those types of children that are obviously being molested. Obviously, children are still going to hell. God can put them out whenever He wants, but some of these children truly deserve to be in hell, considering what I just mentioned. They deserve to have that punishment. They clearly know what they're doing is wrong, and just let them suffer the consequences of it. For certain kids, right? And other kids, obviously, they'll be taken out without the end result of them going into the lake of fire, and the people being satisfied by their own work, that they actually got little kids thrown into the lake of fire. So obviously I keep that in mind with everything else that is actually happening, their overall intents, why they obviously are doing that to their children, why they actually are perverting them and doing even more things like this. So I mean, that's that side of the video. And obviously the unwillingness to fight for many different reasons, uh, and obviously it has to deal with cowardice, it has to deal with fear of the retaliation that is going to come. But realistically, you have to detach yourself from that way of thinking, where you begin embedding in these types of situations that, oh, now it's happening because I actually began engaging in spiritual warfare, and now God didn't protect me and He didn't do this for me, and now I had to suffer for it even though I'm doing something good. And I would think that God actually, obviously God already has heard it all before, right? But anything and everything that you obviously that is a part of the kingdom of darkness, you could stop immediately. And everything that obviously ends up happening inside of your life, you realistically have no reason to worry or anything like that, or have any doubts of who is actually in control, because it was all part of God's perfect plan of salvation. no matter how much work that you did, no matter how much fasting you actually did, there was just no means for you to actually be able to stop any of those situations from happening in your life. I'm going to give the best example of Jesus obviously dying on the crucifixion. You know, that was just a part of God's perfect plan of salvation. And sadly, some of these little situations that come inside of your lives are not realistically as big as these little kids that are going to end up being foster children, or these little kids actually being molested in the kingdom of darkness. So obviously one little inconvenience, two little inconveniences that you weren't actually able to be stopped. You ended up being homeless, or something else ended up happening inside of your life that obviously prevented you from, whatever. These things in themselves are not as big a deal as those situations, correct? So, obviously those are some very, key things to keep in mind. But knowing these tests and these trials that are going to come inside of your life with the specific intent of, causing that sort of reaction from you, that's essentially what's going to happen. That reaction is going to come, and it's going to be inevitable. All you can realistically do is ensure that you are prepared to actually pass those types of tests. Instead of you just going blindly in it and saying it's in the Lord's hands, you have every means to actually be able to prepare yourselves for any and all types of situations. But the only situations that you're not realistically going to prepare for are the ones that you don't think that can happen to you. So I mean, that was pretty easy. You know yourselves better than I do. You know what type of situations that you don't pray for, that you need to pray for. You know what type of situations you're always getting into. And obviously other little key things like that are just common knowledge. Everybody has common ground on for us to be able to understand and to be united under that specific goal in mind, to obviously send legions out to intercept their little orgies and their little whatever else that these individuals are obviously trying to do in the kingdom of darkness. Obviously you could do it. Obviously it's going to happen. You could actually intercede and intercept these little kids. I mean, this is without a doubt in my mind. But on your end, obviously, realistically, you're barely getting into it. You don't know about the temptations that are going to come inside of your life. They're going to cause you to just waver from that truth and to make you think that you're somehow not doing as much damage as you actually are doing, when in reality it's just meant to refine your character, which is in short why the devil is there for. He's meant to punish the wicked, and he's obviously meant to refine, not punish the wicked, he's meant to actually punish you for your wicked deeds in the past, or even as a Christian. And then he's also meant to refine your character, and this is just automatically 100% truth. There's absolutely no way around it. And depending on your own reaction and how you actually cope with certain situations in your life, I always talk about coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms, and being able to cope with these situations in a healthy manner when somebody obviously is petty to you, or somebody obviously curses you, or somebody is obviously your enemy, or just these types of things themselves, is able to teach you how you should be able to cope with these types of situations in a healthy manner, and just realistically be able to cope with them how Christ wants you to cope with them, how he has commanded you to cope with them with all authority, right? So yeah, grace and peace be multiplied to you. The grace is to know and understand what I am saying. The peace to know that it's sent from God, and the mercies to actually receive these things themselves. And the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of the Lord Jesus Christ reign in your hearts and be with you all. So this video obviously is just something that God and Christ himself wanted me to actually make a video about, just because many individuals are very naive, maybe not even ignorant. They know of the possibilities of this stuff actually being able to happen, but they still don't think it could actually happen because of the prayers of the saints, and because God is so good. And obviously these things just begin to be those types of situations where you just put it in parentheses and insert here, whatever excuse, whatever, and insert there, and that's the reason why those situations or those things can't happen. But realistically, everything and anything that is a part of the kingdom of darkness, you could actually stop. And what you can't actually stop is all a part, the crucifixion. Jesus could have been or may not have been homeless. He obviously said that foxes have dens and birds have nests, but where does the Son of Man have to lay? or to lie, whatever, how it's written in the scriptures. But so obviously these are Christ being sinless and perfect. He obviously had no reason to suffer for any of those types of sins or situations, or to suffer in that manner, in the manner that he actually did. But there is just some things that he wasn't able to avoid. All these things were meant for your own edification, and obviously for this purpose in itself, for you to actually really be able to let go of these situations that come inside of your life, let go of the failures where you ended up failing in certain areas, and certain battles and wars, and just obviously be able to understand and know for certain who actually is in control. And all of those losses and all those victories in themselves are all automatically a part of God's perfect plan of salvation. So obviously that in itself is meant to deter the discouragement from actually entering your mind, and to really be full of faith in your Lord, your God, and to ensure that you obviously are not, just dealing with those things that are unnecessary, in all honesty. And just because once everything is all said and done, and this is the millennium, and everything is already done and written, and there's nothing else that we could obviously do about this situation or this type of life that we were living in this time, we'll come to the knowledge and understanding that all these things in themselves were unpreventable. That was all part of God's perfect plan of salvation, to be able to teach the future generations. And that's essentially it. No matter how uncomfortable, no matter how unpleasant these situations actually were, the overall end goal is, you obviously have to step back and look at the bigger picture. It's for the future generations to be able to learn from these mistakes and our mistakes as well. But obviously, we're able to learn from the devil himself. Nobody can kill God, and what are the consequences for thinking those kinds of thoughts? Automatic death. So the devil obviously has a death sentence. The only individual that ever has a death sentence and whatever is the devil himself. Everybody else obviously is still beyond their own independent judgment and independent, means of being able to cope with these situations in a healthy manner. And obviously is to just fall back into the same exact teachings, and to just revert back to what we learned in the scriptures themselves, how Job was able to cope with those situations. He didn't curse God ever. Instead, he blessed him. He said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord gives and he takes away." And these are the same exact types of principles and the same exact types of sayings that you obviously need to be saying inside of your lifestyles. Just begin practicing these things out and just start thinking ahead. And as I was mentioning earlier, that obviously the only situations that you're not going to prepare for are the ones that you don't think that could happen to you. So those situations are obviously going to blindside you 100%. They're going to catch you off guard, and the next thing you know, you're going to be wondering and scratching your head and not being able to recognize your failure. And that failure in itself, you have no means of being able to cope with these types of situations. And you're sitting here just looking back and thinking back on how you were able to cope with certain situations that were similar to the one that you're going through. And honestly, that's just how the human mind obviously works. That's how you're able to process these types of situations, especially as a Christian, when you actually want to do right and you actually want to do good. Your mind automatically just begins filtering all these thoughts out. And automatically you just start thinking about all the times that you were in, similar type situations, and the types of instances that obviously you ended up failing. You learn from your mistakes, or you ended up passing with flying colors, and you were able to obviously cope with that situation in the same exact manner as you were able to cope with the last one that you passed with flying colors. But obviously that's just how the human mind works, sadly and unfortunately. But I'm not saying this because it's meant to emphasize it, or it's meant to, it's just something that you should practice. Obviously, what is better in this situation? To be prepared, to be preparing yourselves, and to stop letting individuals catch you off guard for whatever the situation may be, by letting them pacify you, by thinking that it can't happen to you. I don't know how many individuals, got cancer that didn't think they could get cancer. How many individuals didn't think they could get into car accidents? They got into car accidents. How many individuals didn't think, there's just so much. I'm definitely one of those types of individuals that never thought I could ever fracture my skull, and here I am just walking with a fractured skull above my eye. So I'm one of the types of individuals that never thought I would ever get into a car accident, and here I am who also got into a car accident. And with cancer in itself, obviously I'm learning these things, as the years go by, and I'm recognizing these types of situations and scenarios that life isn't as sweet as people would like to think. There's very joyous occasions in life, and there's many good things that actually happen in individuals' life. But overall, all these things in themselves are meant for you to actually atone for the sins of your ancestors, as well as to be able to perfect your eternal character as you begin to be tried by all various types of fires and trials and temptations. And all these things themselves are obviously meant to guide you and to ensure that you obviously always choose the right and you always choose the good path, instead of you obviously reverting to the same old mistakes that your parents did, the same old mistakes that your family tree did, and everybody else that is in your little inner circle. So obviously this is going to require a lot of maturity for some individuals, for them to actually begin to think for themselves, for them to actually be able to finally let go of that people-pleasing habit. Or, I mean, it's not realistically people-pleasing, but it's more of a follower type of mentality where you just follow the trends of the crowd, and realistically really walk by yourself and be willing to walk by yourself, as many individuals are sadly not willing to walk by themselves. They're not willing to accept that situation could actually happen to them. And sadly, God will definitely show you that it will, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But so yeah, now I'm just gonna ask the Holy Spirit for some direction. What he actually wants to talk about in this video. He says obviously warfare. He wants individuals to actually begin fighting spiritual warfare battles, obviously recognizing who their God actually is, and obviously also recognizing the fact that they have curses and legalities for the devil to come inside of their lives. Don't be so naive to think that the devil isn't going to be able to hurt you. These legalities and your own naivety towards these legalities and naivety towards sin itself is going to be the main reasons why you're actually suffering more than you should. And so obviously all these things was, I imply they're preventable if you just take more action and you just stop being so complacent and so self-satisfied with grace, and like, oh, it's all in your hands, Christ, and I don't have to worry about anything, and realistically really doing a lot more work than you obviously should and you need to be doing, because Christ requires a lot from you. If you notice the prophets in the scriptures in the Old Testament, if you notice even Jesus Christ himself, how he said, I can do nothing without my Father. And through this, he was obviously able to be perfect. Apostle Paul, it realistically doesn't matter what kind of work you actually have to do or what kind of rank you actually have in the kingdom of light. The only thing that obviously matters is that you actually do the work that you're actually called to do. There's been plenty of just disciples that actually ended up getting martyred, and who actually ended up suffering in the same exact manner as how Apostle Paul suffered, correct? I mean, these things themselves have nothing to do with rank, and all these things have to deal with, ensuring that you actually are doing the work, and, just things like that. So you're not going to have an easy life, sadly, especially if you already have hearkened to that bit of the gospel. 100% you are going to have to suffer for the sins of your past life before you actually got saved, as well as any and all future sins in your walk with Christ. So, there's nothing realistically you could do about any of those types of situations except, be strict, discipline yourselves, discipline your bodies, discipline your mind. Stay away from secular music and music that obviously curses and uses profanity, and to just stay away from any and all types of, fiery darts of the devil and his means to actually be able to, to spread these fiery darts. But 100% you're going to have to fight. You're going to have to pray for more faith, obviously, to ensure that you are grounded in that faith when you actually begin engaging yourselves in spiritual warfare. That way, you don't waver. You're not thinking like, what could happen to me if I actually end up really hammering the enemy down and not backing down whatsoever, and not cowering and reverting back to my old habits. and going back to my old patterns in my own ways, and obviously, you're gonna have to pray for a lot longer than 50 seconds, sadly. I mentioned a lot in this video so far, and it's definitely a lot if you haven't actually begun praying about or for any of these things in your life to actually begin happening. And sadly, this just is it's just proof that you're wasting your time. In all honesty, there's just so much time that you actually have wasted, and I'm just letting you know, don't waste anymore. These things are 100% easy. If you let them be easy, if you stop letting these things overwhelm you, you're just being tempted. That way, you actually begin falling and going back to your old habits and your old patterns. And yeah, so these situations in themselves have to deal with your own willingness to fight, your common sense. What else? Uh, Sobriety, your biblical knowledge, theology knowledge. Not really. I'm sorry. I mean, many individuals think that that's going to save them and that's going to help them in this case, but there's just so many false doctrines. For you to actually be able to be led astray, and these things begin to be wild goose chases, and you're just like, well, I just got to do this because my pastor said that. And you begin to obviously, when you actually apply common sense to these biblical things, that in themselves begin to be a lot stronger than the theology that you actually believe in. But, I could apply it to spiritual warfare, to warfare in general. When you apply common sense to warfare, automatically individuals get some sort of a charge. They get bold. They're actually willing to be able to see the error of their ways and their foolish ways of thinking. And obviously that in itself is able to expose your overall, destructive habits and patterns and your ways of thinking that obviously are causing you to come up short, causing you to fall short, and they're just holding you back, correct? And yeah, I don't know what my voice shook a little bit, but yeah, I mean, these things in themselves are just, I mean, they're simple, from my own experience and from my own testimony. I already know these things are pretty simple in themselves. At first, it was overwhelming because these things weren't actually built up to be healthy habits. So I had to work my way up to actually get there. But I mean, obviously, if I would have known that these things were that simple, and the only reason why I felt so overwhelmed was because they weren't. I was barely beginning how to actually practice these things themselves. Obviously, I just would have went full speed ahead, and that would have been it. But still, many individuals hear these types of messages and they just think I'm just some crazy guy, and I don't have to do all that because my pastor says this and my pastor says that. But they're wrong. Sadly, they're going to end up perishing in the lake of fire. Obviously, they don't realistically care about the children being molested or what is actually happening, to take it to spiritual warfare tactics and to take it to that extreme. Instead, they just want to pray to the Lord and put it in the Lord's hands, and they go to sleep every single night without any trouble whatsoever. So that's you. That's me. I mean, basically right now I'm trying to build a habit in itself of ensuring that every stronghold and everything that I actually have to destroy in that day is already destroyed by the time I actually end up going to sleep, just because these are the requirements that Christ actually has for you if you decide to actually be a warrior and you actually decide to take Christ serious. He's going to have certain places that he obviously demands and wants to be destroyed by the end of the day. And whatever you actually end up doing with your time, obviously you're going to end up infuriating and frustrating Christ if you don't get this work actually done. So, this could be done in many different forms. More often than not, preaching the gospel in itself is actually able to destroy certain strongholds and certain kingdoms that the devil actually has on people. But that in itself, you're limiting 100% all the strongholds and all the kingdoms of darkness that you actually need to destroy. I mean, these things themselves begin to open themselves up and manifest, and then you just begin to, it opens your eyes and you actually begin seeing all the damage that you actually are doing collectively and, alone. But this is all done through the work of the Holy Ghost. So, give the glory back to him. And yeah, I mean, but obviously that in itself is already building itself into a habit. I'm beginning to actually notice the pattern of it. I'm being reminded daily. I'm being reminded throughout the day of the strongholds that I obviously need to destroy, not on myself, on my mind, but obviously on the face of this earth and on this planet. Just because there's certain headquarters that are automatically governed and are governing those certain aspects of sexual sin, immorality, fornication, perversion, uh, cursing, profanity, and just obviously anything that has to deal with sin in itself. There's headquarters that are obviously based on those things specifically: pride, um, fear, cowardice. So obviously those are some certain places that you need to get rid of immediately, just so every individual in your little town or in your city is obviously able to be on the same page as you, and they're not actually being held back by that fear or that cowardice in itself. So obviously you're kind of delivering them, but you still need to deliver them as well as getting the evil spirits out of their vessels, out of their minds, their hearts, their souls, their will, and their emotions. False revelations. What else? False messages. Many individuals get false messages all the time of people thinking that certain individuals are their wives or their husbands, and automatically that's already a network in itself. You need to get rid of those things in your town or in your vicinity or whatever place that you actually are at, because that one message is way more than just that one message, right? I said one more. That one message is more than just that one message. There's just so many different forms that it actually comes in, so you need to attack that principle itself of the false revelations or that false messages or words of God, and those things themselves need to be 100% removed. Just because it comes in many different forms. You may think that God actually calls you to actually take the job, but in reality the job is selling sin. Or you may think that God actually calls you to be this individual as his wife, but in reality what ended up happening, that's not your wife. Now you're in fornication, and next thing you know, you meet your real wife, or she cheats on you. She's having orgies for herself with other individuals in the kingdom of darkness. And these things themselves, don't be naive about it and just shrug it off and be like, whatever, my real wife isn't like that, she's not having orgies, and just leave it off on that note, correct? And just close that door. But so as you can see, there's many different forms of that, and it's obviously networked. If it's already getting to you, it's getting to another individual to cause that person to feel led by the Holy Spirit to come to you and tell you that they're your husband, or cause that individual to come inside of your life and tell you that they feel like they're your wife, and so many other different things. And I already know that these false spirits in themselves, false revelations, is realistically what it actually is, that they actually receive that, I'm this individual as his husband, or I'm this individual, I have to take this job, or I have to buy this car. Obviously that in itself, it could be a specific reason why God doesn't want you buying a car, or that car specifically, and probably has too many, the repairs cost more than the car itself. So, and there's just so many different means and so many different forms that it actually takes, and all of it has to deal with protection in itself. So, obviously, consider it protection and not rejection for any of these job offers, cars, spouses, and other things like that. Something many individuals can't take and can't handle. They can't handle rejection, for whatever the case may be, and especially when God is actually tied to it. When those types of situations and instances actually happen, it's like, God, he said this, God, he said that, and in reality, he's like, I didn't say anything. You realistically should have took it with me in prayer. You should have asked. You should have did this. You should have did that. And more often than not, you led yourself astray because it had to deal with sin. Sadly. So God is not ever going to tell you to take a job that has to deal with sin. He's not ever going to do any of those types of things themselves that has to deal with sin 100%. So obviously that's the main means to be able to discern what is fake and what is not, right? So I was mentioning earlier how I was making that into a habit. destroying all the false revelations and revelatory messages of this and that and who this person may be, the spiritual identity of another individual. I mean, they oftentimes do frame many people. And they'll say that this individual is a witch. She's not even a witch. They'll say that this individual is a rapist. This individual is not a rapist. But obviously, if they could do that, they could convince you that this individual isn't a Satanist, or they could convince you that this individual isn't a witch. So hopefully you're actually able to recognize how serious this actually is. The spiritual is real. These phonies and these counterfeits are almost, almost as close as to the real thing, right? Sadly, and many individuals, especially baby Christians, they're more susceptible to these things themselves. For them to actually be able to take the bait for these little things, because they're just so accustomed. They have this type of baby level trust, or this childlike trust with God Himself, that they think that God isn't going to lead them astray. But they obviously lack a lot of scriptural knowledge, as well as just common sense with God. He obviously does not want you to deal with any type of sin. He does not want you to obviously take any jobs that have to deal with sin. He does not want you obviously being in sin whatsoever. So these are the telltale signs for you to actually be able to recognize and know for certain what is God's will and what isn't God's will. Sin, automatically the devil. The devil and his little counterfeits. And once you actually begin to realistically look back in your life and just be able to recognize when these types of situations actually came inside of your life, you're able to see the counterfeits are very close and very similar to the real things themselves. Maybe some of you individuals have already gotten some real revelations, some real truths, for you to actually be able to discern what is from God and what isn't from God, and you're actually able to see how close these counterfeits actually are. I've already been in that level as well when I actually began, being involved in the spiritual type of stuff and really taking that serious, to actually begin to, to notice the counterfeits, and just how many counterfeits there actually are for anything and everything that you actually want. Realistically, when I actually wanted something, or I wanted something to obviously be according to God's will and God's plan of salvation, this is obviously when I received a counterfeit, and it wasn't exactly, or it wasn't God's will whatsoever. So that in itself was actually able to teach me to a certain level. My own heart is obviously going to lead me astray when God obviously has a different plan altogether, instead of the one that I obviously was looking for confirmation. In all honesty, I wasn't realistically looking for the truth, and that was the main reason why I ended up taking the bait, and I ended up obviously doing so many different things, hurting my own self, hurting my own mind, as well as just not applying common sense to these things themselves. When I actually was cursed, I had a lot of curses. I wasn't in the deliverance ministry for me to actually know why these things themselves are actually in my life, why these curses, this demonic activity, these entities, and everything else, how to break these curses and all these things themselves. I was relying heavily on God's grace and God's mercy, and I wasn't realistically getting any of the deliverance that I actually wanted. And so, those types of situations, pain in itself obviously taught you in those circumstances, for you to actually be able to know, that God obviously requires a lot more from you than you just relying on His grace. He obviously wants you to work in the same exact manner as how you obviously work certain jobs, and and work jobs in general, for you to actually be able to have a roof over your head, and not realistically be homeless, carless, jobless, and so many other different things, correct? And so, these things themselves automatically taught me, that I'm leading myself astray. I'm leading myself astray, right? According to my own desires and according to my own carnal wants. And realistically, it has nothing to do with God's perfect plan of salvation. It has nothing to do with God's plan for my life. So, unfortunately, some of you are just meant to be single until Christ returns. Some of you are just meant to be, it's sad that I actually have to say that some of you people are just meant to be virgins until Christ obviously returns. Get over it. I have a kid out of wedlock. It's, whatever. the only thing I regret about that in itself is not marrying the girl that actually ended up getting pregnant, and having a kid during this time because of how evil and how wicked everything actually is. So, I mean, honestly, it's whatever. I could have waited like 20, 30 more years. I could have waited until Christ returned for me to actually have kids. And there's no rush, there's no hurry whatsoever. I wish I would have waited. And there's so many individuals just regrets that are not virgins, who have kids out of wedlock, who got kids before they actually ended up getting married to their real spouse. And obviously their main regret in itself is just not waiting for their soulmates and those types of things themselves, but their spirit wives and their spirit husbands. And yeah, so sadly many individuals are just not realistically able to detach themselves from their own wants, their own desires, and to realistically only want what Christ actually wants for them. They lack a lot of faith in all honesty, and that's the main reason why they obviously just continue just praying for these types of things for their own wants and desires, and realistically not um, taking a leap of faith. Like Christ knows exactly what's best for them, and Christ knows exactly what they need. And sometimes it's just not that girl. Sometimes it's just not that guy. Sometimes it's just not that job. Sometimes it's not just that. Obviously, those things in themselves would have destroyed you, correct? Because they had to deal with sin. And Christ is obviously in your best interest at all times. He knows about these things themselves. He obviously wants you to perfect your eternal character. He has that in mind. And especially if you actually know that, he knows that you actually have that in mind. He already knows that he's actually able to do a lot more work in your life off that alone, off that basis alone, right? And it is good in itself for many individuals that obviously are actually hearkening and taking those things serious. But if you actually know these things, just pray about it to Christ. Ask him to perfect your eternal character, and you're gonna notice a lot of differences and changes in your life. A lot of wants and desires are automatically going to melt away from your actual character, and you're going to be just scratching your head wondering, how is this stuff happening? I actually liked this stuff before, but now I actually don't like these things anymore. I'm more centered on what Christ actually wants from me, and obviously that's the overall goal. You're realistically really trusting him like a father, and like the father that he actually is to you. And yeah, I mean, these things, I wish I would have learned that sooner. You always hear that, it's very often it's oversaid in many individuals' lives. So realistically, you need to hearken to that. You need to apply those things now to your life, especially as a baby Christian. You realistically don't, I'm sorry, you realistically don't know that much about theology and scripture itself. All you realistically know is that I have to do good works and I have to do good things, and that's perfect for Christ, for so much fertile soil and so much fertile ground for Christ to actually be able to perfect your eternal character and to actually get you to bear some fruits that the Father is glorified. So that in itself is perfect. Once you actually begin to delve into theology, obviously this is when the arguments end up happening and the arguments end up coming, because so many individuals are not going to agree with your theology, and so many individuals are not going to agree with your doctrine. So many people are not going to agree with your ways of thinking and your pastors and those things in themselves. So these things automatically just expose that. What's more important, what what causes a lot of problems, what causes a lot of flesh to come in your life, what causes a lot of sins to end up happening and coming in your vessels, in your lives. And you could avoid all those things entirely. So I mentioned that. Wow, I'm just stuttering a lot. I mentioned that in a past video how obviously that's how I built this foundation in Christ as a Christian. Obviously all of it had to deal with ensuring that you know the foundation was fruits in itself. It wasn't theology. I read the scriptures back to front. The scriptures are what they are. It's just common sense. You realistically don't need excuse me, you realistically don't need a pastor or a preacher to actually tell you or explain those types of things themselves in the scriptures. That you just take them for what they actually are, and that's essentially it. Once you actually read them back to front, you're actually able to connect the dots, or maybe God gave me a gift of, being intelligent, and for me to actually be able to see those things themselves, and just to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle in the right places. But um, did I say intelligent or intelligence? Yeah, anyway, I forgot. But still, maybe he did in that aspect, uh, but yeah, those things themselves just begin to be easy in all honesty. But too many individuals just let so many different types of people influence their own beliefs, their own theologies, when in reality, they're just that simple to be able to understand and to be able to, interpret. You don't need anybody to obviously interpret those things themselves, like it's a foreign language, or like it's, I don't know, just calculus or math or algebra or any of those things themselves. You automatically have the Holy Spirit to teach you and to guide you, and common sense as well. That's always going to be a very good means to be able to rely on while you're actually reading the scriptures, and some people just don't have it, in all honesty. So especially baby Christians, automatically they obviously always want to be able to please Christ. They always want to be able to do the right thing, to actually be able to do all types of good works, but then they get into theology and that automatically cuts their spiritual life short. So theology, good works, is spirit. Theology is sort of flesh, in all honesty, with so many types of doctrines, so many types of denominations and churches and Christianity, religions, anything and everything, right? If they could get an individual to actually believe, and they'll obviously be able to, sucker them into the lake of fire. Uh, so yeah, gonna ask Jesus Christ what else he wants to say. He says to pray, to find hope, to find means to actually be able to keep the faith. And I don't even know why he's saying the message. It seems like a lot of people are just discouraged, in all honesty, which is sad in itself. So I mentioned obviously earlier, what I just mentioned has to deal with self, but what I mentioned earlier has to deal with, loving loving your neighbor as yourself, right? The children, Satan is sending angels, cutting the Satanists off from the power, and obviously binding and loosing their power, right? Binding their power and loosing enough legions to actually get the work done. Correct. Understanding that it's not going to be a quick fix. You're gonna have to pray until the work is done. You're gonna have to do all the work there is needed to actually be done, right? They're ready for war, so obviously don't be naive about those things, right? Prepare for everything and anything, and know that you're going to win. Sadly, there's just been so many types of battles and so many types of spiritual fights that I've been in that I obviously won, but I overlooked things that I obviously needed to not overlook, and obviously, I'm focusing my attention on those as well as everything else that I actually have been doing, as well as what I actually have been mentioning in this video, ensuring that all of these types of little strongholds and kingdoms and headquarters are actually destroyed, instead of just letting them go on and thriving and prospering and doing whatever they want, whatever they please with humanity and all these types of individuals inside of this life. I mentioned in the past video how they're actually able to curse an individual's car, to actually get inside of their devices, through them actually acting petty. And sadly, that's essentially how it actually works, in all honesty. I think it gets you to actually sin. They could get you to actually fall into temptation and fall for whatever types of sins that they actually give you. Obviously, they gain some sort of legality in your phones, in your cars, in your homes, in your appliances, and your refrigerators, and just anything and everything. Realistically, these devils are actually able to get inside of your accessories and everything else, sadly. And many individuals are ignorant about that. And sadly, some of the pettiest people that I actually know are also some of the brokest. These types of individuals are driving the dingiest cars, and obviously all that in itself has to deal with their own sins that they actually are suffering for. Not realistically getting good deals. Their cars are always breaking down. They're always, getting flat tires. Their car always gets blown out. Their tires always get blown out. They're always getting into car accidents, and all these things themselves are evidence of the manifestations of their sins and iniquities inside of their lives. Sadly for them, and these individuals keep taking the bait day after day, and there's not realistically anything that they could actually do about it. They actually gain this little bit of knowledge, but they refuse to actually hold themselves uh, accountable, and as well as making sure that they're actually disciplined and they're strict with their minds and whatever they think and whatever they actually do. Excuse me. The secular world likes to call it karma, but that in short essentially is just reaping what you sow. So these individuals are sowing so many, sins, so many curses, so many, means of actually having devils inside of their appliances, and they're reaping it back 100-fold. And sadly, that's essentially what is actually happening. And then they're wondering why they have so many problems, so many suffrages, and all of it has to deal with their own petty attitude and their own petty actions in itself. So obviously fear the Lord, in all honesty. Those things in themselves are serious, especially when I put it in those types of terms, for you to actually be able to recognize and see that, my words have consequences, my actions have consequences with God. He's always listening to my thoughts, and there's nothing realistically that I could actually do about who he actually is. He's going to continue being God. He's going to continue cursing me for my actions and for my pettiness, so I might as well just cut it out, right? That ensures obviously why God doesn't want you gossiping, why he doesn't want you talking about individuals with cancer or individuals in a wheelchair. Yeah, because obviously he could just force you to end up having kids with cancer, or force you to actually end up having children that are actually lame, sadly, or slow, or with disabilities. They're disabled, they have Down syndrome, or whatever else the case may actually be. They may get rejected. Maybe you call individuals as ugly, and then now individuals are calling your children ugly. I'm not saying obviously that your children are obviously ugly. Those things themselves are just easy to get rid of. There's some sort of unclean spirit that is on your kid, that is causing, it's a curse, that is automatically causing every individual that comes into contact with them to obviously overthink and to just look at those things themselves. I've been through it many times before, and I just casted those things out, and everything just returned back to normal. So through trial and error, through obviously experience itself, I was able to see that those things in themselves are just it's like a curse of overthinking. In all honesty, you could actually lose virtues and integrity and moral compasses inside of your children, for them to actually be able to not be attached to those iniquities and not be attached to those destructive habits that are going to cause God's rebuke to come inside of their lives, as well as watching your tongues, watching whatever you do and say around kids themselves, because they're very impressionable in all honesty. So they do suffer for their own sins in all honesty, as well as they suffer for your sins as well. And those things themselves automatically have to deal with, God's perfect plan of salvation, what is spirit and what is flesh. Me myself, I had a very clear mind in all honesty when I was growing up. I didn't think anything about anyone. I had a very quiet mind, and I didn't realistically think twice or whatever else. Be polite. My friends made fun of me. They made fun of whatever they made fun of. I made fun of them as well, and obviously just making jokes like that. But overall, obviously, I understood if you don't have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? And other things like that. So those are virtues obviously you can still inside of them, as well as not to call anybody ugly. That's a sin in itself. So it's pretty scary, to actually have to deal with the consequences of your own actions for just calling somebody else ugly. It has to deal with your own iniquities and your own sins in your heart, that you feel a need to actually be rude and disrespectful to another individual, whether they are ugly or whether they are. Sadly, many individuals are just not ugly. they oftentimes are so bombarded with these types of thoughts that they're so, unworthy, they're so whatever this, they're that, they'll never be pretty, they'll never be beautiful. But obviously, and then another individual comes into contact with them, they realistically don't think a single thing about them. And I mean, for them it's a breath of fresh air, but obviously that's just evidence of the oppression that was inside of your life, all of your life, for however long it was actually in their life. So, those types of individuals obviously come in their life for that specific purpose, and is for them to actually be able to know that not everybody thinks like they do, not everybody is such an overthinker like them, or, whatever else, like you're overreacting, right? All those things are 100% you're able to get rid of. They're all unclean spirits that try to force another individual to obviously focus and put the attention on whatever else you're insecure about, and your insecurities themselves. And that's essentially it. I recognize the rules of the game, how they obviously play their little game with me, and they do it with everybody else, in all honesty. And that's the proof and that's the evidence, right? But you have to be strong. You have to be strong, in all honesty. You have to be able to blow past those things themselves and recognize that it has nothing to do with looks, but it has to deal with 100% the heart issue, right? You want to be clean, you want to be rid of all these nasty and ugly and hideous looking devils and dirty and whatever else these devils actually are, because that's essentially what they are. They're vile. They only came inside of your life to torment and torture you. So obviously you've seen plenty of movies of other individuals that were just more than willing to torture other human beings, and how evil and how sick they actually were. And these devils are, in short, the exact same, in all honesty. So just recognize and just know that this is all in your head. Not everybody thinks the same way as you do. You don't have to be petty. You don't have to lash out many individuals. Obviously, some people are like that, but it is whatever. You're still going to be held accountable for your own actions and what you actually do in these circumstances itself, because Christ 100% is sending it inside of your life for a blessing. That way you actually are delivered from your old ways of thinking and those things themselves. But I mean, that's just that aspect, in all honesty. I don't want to get too into that. I already have come to a knowledge and understanding of it, as well as I already know what could happen. Many individuals are going to be focused on the looks and the beauty, and automatically they're going to fall into the sin of vanity. They're going to fall into the sin of conceit. They're not obviously that strong yet for them to actually be able to reject those types of thoughts, and to be able to reject those types of ways of thinking and conceit itself. And they're going to get in love with their own beauty, and automatically they're going to fall into the same patterns that they obviously have always fallen into. As well as that's something that many individuals obviously tend to gravitate to, especially when they often always get belittled and so discouraged about their looks. Is obviously they use that as a self-defense mechanism. They're like, I'm super pretty, and I'm super this, I'm super that, and they have to play hard to get right. They have to do things like that to show that they actually have some sense of worth, and they actually have worth, when in reality that's an iniquity in itself that you need to get rid of 100%. You can live completely fine, sane, normal, and healthy if you would just, be bold and, in short, stop limiting these things to your own understanding and comprehension in itself, and realistically view these things as for what they actually are. It's all spiritual, and yeah, all that is all flesh, and all of it you could get rid of, but you have to be persistent, in all honesty, and you have to be willing to change and focus on your heart. So that's that, right? Obviously, I don't talk about those things themselves. I always talk about virtues. I always talk about wisdom. I always talk about the Proverbs, Psalms, and everything else that Christ obviously wants me to focus on. Everything has to do with heart-centered, ensuring that all of it has to deal with being people after God's own heart, ensuring that you're not coming up short to that, and knowing that Christ himself is obviously going to hold you accountable to those things themselves. So that's essentially what I actually tend to gravitate towards, just because of the holiness and the sanctification process that actually ends up coming with it. But many individuals obviously all have their own desires, they all have their own wants, and they obviously end up leading themselves astray to their own desires and wants, failing to recognize that Christ already knows, but he obviously wants them to focus more what I just mentioned. He wants them to obviously focus on the heart. He wants them to obviously focus on holiness, integrity, losing good integrity, losing good virtues, and losing good moral compasses inside of your mind, your heart, your soul, your will, and your emotions, and all these things themselves, and really realistically being able to detach yourselves from all the attraction of being attractive, and just all the attraction from actually getting the praises of men, sadly. But uh you know many individuals still refuse to hearken to that, and they end up going right on their way. They get what they actually wanted from Christ. They completely abandon the faith, and they completely just do whatever they want afterwards. And Christ ends up losing their soul, and there's not realistically anything that you could actually do about those situations, but actually pray for them to go back home to Christ, and to guide himself, and to stop running away from him. Recognizing that the only person that is actually able to satisfy you is Christ himself. There's just so many types of means that the devil is actually able to give you this momentary pleasure, and this momentary satisfaction, but realistically all of it has to do with uh, having this satisfaction that needs to be filled, and the only means for you to actually be able to get that filled and your desires filled is from you delighting in obeying Christ and delighting in obeying God. And I mean, I already have reached that level, and I already have gotten to that point where obviously everything that I want to deal with has to deal with being obedient to God 100%, actually delighting from it, and genuinely delighting in obeying everything that Christ obviously tells me to do, sadly. But many individuals are so scared of it. They think that if they actually begin getting into that little path, they're not actually going to be able to enjoy everything that life has to offer, when in reality, what does life have to offer? Food, is, wine. I mean, sadly, many individuals don't think that they can actually drink wine, but, these things, Christ doesn't want you being an alcoholic, because, obviously, these things themselves, your parents taught you good virtues and things not to do and things to do. But these things themselves begin to take a life of their own, in all honesty. I could go on and on about these types of things themselves, about why Christ wants you to obviously choose to hearken to him, and to choose to always do the right thing, and to choose the good path. But sadly, many individuals are scared. They think that they're going to be sucked out of the life and out of all the fun that life has to offer. And in reality, obviously, that's a flat out lie. I already know firsthand, life is more than whatever I actually think, and because of that, I can't limit it into what I actually think. I could only do what Christ himself actually wants me to do. And essentially, yeah, but I mean, realistically, this type of life that we actually are living in right now, when was the last time that we actually we actually had a peaceful life, right? It's been 8 years, 10 years since we actually had a carefree life, and I mean, it's been a while, but this is obviously what the devil is robbing you from. He's doing it on purpose. And if you let him rob you from this carefree lifestyle, this carefree life, then obviously he's going to take advantage of it, in all honesty. So, but still, you need to hearken. You need to recognize the signs of the times. You don't have that type of luxury right now. Christ obviously wants you to work. Everything that I mentioned earlier about the children being molested, and all of them are willing to actually partake in those actual activities, and they're actually willing to act those things out. The adult women having orgies with little boys and little girls, they're obviously doing all types of vile things to them, and all sorts of spirits of sodomy and things like that. These things are actually happening, dude. And honestly, many individuals are just so naive to those types of things themselves, that they refuse to actually fight, and they refuse to actually stop that madness, and to stop that entirely. So yeah, I'm gonna ask the Holy Spirit what else he wants to say, just because I'm running out of words. He says to fight for your lives and fight for their lives. Deliver yourselves, that way you actually are able to be more efficient in fighting and more efficient in spiritual warfare. Stop being so faithless. put your trust in Christ, put your trust in God, and just little principles like that, right? I stuttered a lot in this video. Sorry, I was like, I have like saliva in my mouth, and I was trying not to spit everywhere. Uh, so yeah, gonna ask Jesus what else he actually wants to say and talk about. Yeah, just fight for the children. Sadly, many individuals don't actually want to hearken to that message. They want to continue just worshiping Christ and thinking that through this type of worship in itself, Christ is actually going to send holy angels to actually fight for the children themselves. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to actually be willing to call these angels out into the battle and to actually be willing to risk it all, right? Risk your life, risk your house, risk your car, prepare, risk your job, or don't bother. In all honesty, Christ already gave you the requirements to actually be able to be a disciple of Christ. You can't love anything or any of those things more than him. You can't love your family more than him. So obviously automatically you're not worthy to be a disciple of Christ. He already knows that many individuals are actually want to be worthy to be a disciple of Christ. So obviously it's not going without his foreknowledge of the things that you actually want to do and your desires that you actually have. The spiritual desires. It's not like you want a Ferrari, but obviously you're gonna have to let those things go. You're gonna have to pray for more strength. You're gonna have to pray for more what is it called? For more deliverance. In all honesty, I had to deliver myself from those same exact things themselves. Also with my hair, I was scared of fighting because I was scared of going bald. I'm not going bald, whatever, just because I'm fighting more. My hair grew back, and now I don't realistically care about fighting or engaging in spiritual warfare. Uh, what else? And there's just so many different means that the devil actually throws in your life to actually prevent you before you actually begin becoming a threat to his kingdom. So hopefully you're able to see that, especially with baldness. I mean, that's embarrassing in itself for many people, but obviously if I'm telling you all you have to do is fight, bind and loose, break these curses up, break the curse of baldness up, and just unmanageable hair and everything else, and obviously you're going to get the results that you actually want to see, just because all these things themselves are just spiritual. Christ curse you with baldness for your perversion or whatever, right? Ancestral generational curses, sins, and other things like that. He definitely curse you for it. And Noah, right? So fight. At least you're not going bald. At least your hairline isn't receding. Mine isn't. I mean, that about wraps it up in all honesty for that aspect. Obviously, he tells me to tell you these things that way the pride is actually able to get out of my life. Many individuals are too proud or unwilling to actually say any of those things themselves. So hopefully, if I am actually able to tell you those things themselves, you're able to be, to gain some sort of strength where you didn't deal with those types of situations, or maybe you are dealing with those types of situations, whatever the case may be, right? You need to let go of that pride in itself for you to actually be able to finally be free from that bondage of fear that the devil obviously has ensnared you in and has kept you in for such a long time. And to you, it's just second nature. It's just for you to actually act like that. You like to say that you actually have control of those types of situations, but sadly, you don't actually have any control of it whatsoever. So just let it go. Pray to Christ. Pray for Christ. Pray to Christ. Uh, and repent. Man, I really don't know what else to actually talk about. basically all the things that actually I'm talking about have to do with my own personal experience, learning from my own mistakes and hoping that you don't actually repeat these same mistakes as well. But you will. Those things are inevitable, especially as a baby Christian, or especially as somebody who's actually beginning to do these things themselves. You're just not at that level yet, especially your discernment isn't as sharp as you think, and your scripture sense isn't as sharp as you actually think either. So you're going to have to pray for your spiritual sensibility to be sharpened and for it to obviously diminish the emotional reliance to these situations that come inside of your life. In short, because that's what you actually are doing. You're relying on your own emotions for every single thing and every single circumstance that actually comes inside of your life. Sadly, that's just how people actually are, and that's just how people actually think. Automatically, when they actually feel these types of emotions inside of their life, like anger, lust, frustration, automatically they feel, because they automatically feel these things in their own vessel, that for them to be as honest and as true to themselves as possible, they automatically have to act these things out, sadly. And unfortunately, they're just being tempted, in all honesty. They already believe in the secular lie. They don't believe in all this spiritual stuff, that they could actually be tempted, that devils come inside of their life to tempt them for that specific purpose. And because of that, they're not actually able to admit or, be able to let go of those situations themselves, and so they obviously just continue just taking the bait every single time. They're just like, yeah, this is me, I have to be honest with myself. I have to, I have to be true to myself. My reactions and my emotions, in short, is obviously the reasons why I actually act the way that I do. And in reality, obviously, the spiritual sensibility, part of what I actually mentioned, has to deal with you automatically, obeying all of Christ's commandments, to love your enemies as yourself, to actually bless those that curse you, and not be so emotionally reliant for these situations themselves, for you to actually be able to act out, or for you to actually be able to cope with these situations in a healthy manner. But obviously it's destructive. How many people relied on their own emotions and end up getting into a fight and going straight to jail? How many people ended up relying on their emotions, getting afraid and just flooring it and taking off and fleeing from the police? So obviously, just choose the right thing. In all honesty, these things are pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy, especially once you realistically really sit down and quiet your mind and really reflect and look at all the situations in your environment. And you really watch your environment as well, and for you to actually be able to slow these things down. And that way you actually are able to process these things a lot more. Because, realistically, everybody's always living in that same way of thinking. It's always go, go, go for them. They're always just so impulsive. Automatically, they're just so accustomed and used to actually going with this flow that they obviously have had. The rhythm of their obviously daily lives that they just normally have, right? They don't see anything wrong with those types of lifestyles, and Christ obviously puts these situations in their lives that disrupts this rhythm and this harmony, and automatically they get frustrated, correct? Automatically these individuals are brought out of their comfort zone, and obviously that's meant to just teach them, as well as for them to actually be able to recognize that Christ notices, he acknowledges your rhythm and your flow, and he's still watching you and he's still taking care of you for your overall eternity and your eternal character. You obviously have to choose the right thing for those situations and be willing to overlook and let go of those situations themselves. He is not going to let you go whatsoever. Sadly, he wants to save you from the lake of fire, is what I'm trying to say. You may think that he's doing the right thing. You may think that you're doing the right thing by actually, choosing to reject Christ because of the suffrages that are actually coming, the frustrations and the disharmony and out of whack and out of rhythm that is actually in your life. But all of that has to deal with Christ's unwillingness to actually let you go and perish in the lake of fire. So hopefully you're able to see how much he actually loves you. He's actually always watching you consistently, and for that specific reason, obviously this is why the devil isn't actually able to enter your vehicles, your belts, your spark plugs, whatever that ends up causing you to get into a car accident, correct? You know, your tire gets blown out, and next thing you know, you crash into another car. You end up losing your life. You go straight to hell. So, because of God's grace and providence, you know, this is the exact reason why you don't actually perish and you don't actually go into the lake of fire, sadly. But many individuals still reject Christ. They think that they have a more excellent way. I mean, you can pray for that. You can pray for a more excellent way than the types of ways that are actually coming inside of their lives. But in reality, you know, it's just a lie. If he's watching you, he obviously knows. He's going to listen to your prayer in all honesty, but you have to be prepared. You know, you have to be able to be willing to acknowledge what you actually asked him for and what you actually asked him to do. Sadly, because many individuals are not realistic, they're just naive. They think that it's going to be easy, it's going to be a walk in the park, and Christ is just going to, you know, make things less smoother for them. But in reality, you know, it doesn't happen like that. And you drop your guard completely, you know, and you end up, you know, failing these tests that you actually would have passed. But you dropped your guard and you thought they would, you know, whatever. Thought. So yeah, he loves you. He has your best interest in mind, but you have very little faith in him and what he actually is doing. And because of that, you get angry, you get flared up, you think you know better. And that's a lie, right? The fact that you actually got frustrated proves otherwise. Those are some things and some habits that you need to get rid of. You're not so friendly after all. You're not so outgoing. You're not so overlooking. You're not so chill. You're not so down to earth as you thought. And whatever, just let it go. In all honesty, those things in themselves have nothing to deal with you, your character. Your mistakes don't define you. So just let it go. So I'm gonna break all these curses in your life, however strong they may be. Excuse me. And yeah, I'm gonna lose graces inside of your vessel, inside of your mind, your heart, your soul, your will, and your emotions, as well as integrities and moral compasses and peace, tranquility, quietness, calmness. Yeah. God bless you. And yeah, I don't realistically have anything else to actually talk about, but definitely you're gonna have to fight, in all honesty. It's gonna make it a lot easier, but these situations are going to come inside of your life if you're not accustomed to that type of harmony or that type of rhythm. Then honestly, you're gonna get caught off guard. You're not realistically going to be able to see the benefits and the value of these situations that come inside of your life. All of it is meant for your own benefit. They're just fires, tests, and trials for you to actually choose the right way and the good path, sadly. They're just opportunities for you to actually be able to choose the right path and the good way for whatever type of circumstances they may be. But many people are too negative about those types of situations themselves. And whenever those types of situations actually end up coming in their lives, automatically, you know, it's just you, always. It's always your harmony, it's always your rhythm, it's always your flow, and nothing else, sadly. But hopefully you're actually able to see, you know, it's your overall mindset, your overall state of mind that is actually causing this type of damage and trauma to your life. Well, I was gonna say drama, but trauma too. That's why you have so many problems, sadly. Just your poor outlook. Fight, work, pray, hustle. Obviously, I'm not telling you to sell drugs, but whatever. Hurry up. Amen. Fight.